So I'm going to continue to read a bit more about the history of Pure Land from the perspective of Harold Stewart, the author of the wonderful book A Chime of Windbells. He goes on here to say, as a basis for their classification of the various schools, the Pure Land masters selected a passage in the Igyohan, or the 9th chapter of Book 5 of the Dasabhumivasa Sastra by Nagarjuna, who is therefore considered as the first patriarch. Their own doctrines of pure faith and the invocation of the name are called the easy path, while all others belong to the difficult path. Following the third patriarch in China, Tan Luan, these two ways were assigned to the other power and the self-power, respectively. The most penetrating criticism of the Buddhism of their period put forward by Honen and Shinran was that whilst the way of the sages had, in earlier times, been fully efficacious, it had now, due to the downward course of the cycle, become invalidated by one great difficulty. Namely, almost no one could put it into practice any longer. Both, master and disciple, who were among the most learned and most devout men of their day, had spent more than 20 years on Mount High, headquarters of Tendai, studying and attempting to follow the difficult path without avail. True, there might still be rare exceptions, perhaps one or two in a century, born with the requisite spiritual endowment. But how could the Mahayana call itself the great vehicle if it left most of humanity fallen by the wayside? For the Mahayana, humanity is a continent, not an archipelago. We carry not only our own individual burden of karma, both good and bad, but are also inextricably involved in the onerous past of all our ancestors. The thoughts, words, and deeds of family, class, caste, race, and finally the whole of humankind. It is this collective karma, as much as individual shortcomings and transgressions, which prevents any one person from gaining liberation by their own unaided efforts. Hence, even the wisest and most virtuous, like Shan Tao, who lived a life of blameless purity, felt compelled to consider himself as sunk in ignorance and defilement from the incalculable past. When Vimalakirti, the greatest of Buddhist lay sages, was asked the reason for his continual ill health, he replied that he was sick because all men were sick. A wish to take heaven by storm may well conceal motivation by an aggressive ego. In these latter days of the law, anyone who claims to belong to that elite of exceptions still capable of the difficult path of self-help is almost certainly deceiving himself, and probably others as well, by his secret pride. Shinran taught all who sincerely requested him, but refused to accept or acknowledge any disciples. All schemes for self-improvement are really subtle pretensions and subterfuges of the ego. If factors such as collective karma and the downward course of the cycle made attainment almost impossible then, how much more so now, 700 years later? Nagarjuna himself, the author of the Madhyamika dialectic, and after the Buddha, probably the most towering intellect produced by Indian Buddhism, was reborn at the end of his life in the Western paradise. Incarnation in human form, from which alone Buddhahood can be reached, is immensely difficult to attain. And so Issa, a lifelong follower of Shinshu, whose spirit permeates so many of his haiku, felt the urgent need to seize and not to waste this precious opportunity in the pursuit of evanescent pleasures. His haiku goes, "We roam about this touchwood world of ours, which forms the roof of hell, admiring flowers. We roam about this touchwood world of ours, which forms the roof of hell, admiring flowers." No matter how well meant the intentions with which we pave our way to atomic perdition, we are no longer able to save ourselves by rational thought which we have put at the service of unregenerate passions and desires. But no devotee can summon up wholehearted devotion at will. No one can choose to invoke the divine name, for the name must choose the invoker. What then can be done to acquire the pure, selfless faith which we lack, and which alone can extricate us from our human predicament. The final answer arrived at by Shin is that there is absolutely nothing whatsoever that we can do to free ourselves, except to renounce all our mental and material attachments without reservation, to surrender unconditionally our individual will, and throw ourselves wholly upon the divine mercy, which, no matter how shameful our past karma, will never be refused. Even our last desire, the desire to call the name, must be abandoned, for only then can we be freed from self-effort by the working of the other power. Such a remedy is not likely to taste very palatable to that aggressive self-assertion and ego-aggrandizement which is now held up as the desirable norm for modern humanity, and it will cause no surprise if no one now is prepared to swallow such a bitter pill. Isa's own confession of faith in the postscript to his Oragaharu reveals the depth and sincerity of his submission. Quote, "The great thing of the next world is simply to throw yourself before the Buddha and beseech that you be sent to paradise or purgatory according to his good pleasure." Close quote. Allowance should be made here for poetic exaggeration, for it is not orthodox Shin doctrine to regard Amida as some sort of oriental despot who judges and condemns. Amida sentences no one to hell, which is of our own illusory devising, but wishes to lead all to the land of highest happiness, even those who cannot or will not call on him for aid. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.